The first time I met Karen, she was standing on my porch with a clipboard. A fake smile, and that tone people use when they're about to tell you something you won't like. She was the president of our HOA, and she loved making sure everyone knew it. At first, I thought it was just a quick neighborly chat about trimming hedges or repainting a fence. But that day, she told me my rental property, the little house I'd been renting out for years, was bringing down the neighborhood. She claimed it violated several community standards and needed to be sold immediately. I laughed it off, thinking she was bluffing. But Karen wasn't the kind of person you could ignore. Within weeks, I was buried in HOA violation letters, sudden inspections, and threats of legal action. Every little thing, from the color of the blinds to the way my tenants parked their car, became a serious problem. She made it clear that my life would be miserable until I gave in. Then came the twist. She kindly offered to help me avoid more trouble. Her son was looking to buy a house in the neighborhood, and she'd make sure the HOA backed off if I sold it to him, but at a price far lower than what it was worth. It was obvious what she was doing, but at that point, I was so worn down by her constant harassment that I agreed. What she didn't know was that I'd been reading the HOA's bylaws and combing through my own contracts late at night. I'd found a little legal loophole, something perfectly within the rules, but almost nobody noticed. By the time the deal was signed, it was too late for her to realize what I'd slipped into the paperwork. Karen thought she had forced me into the perfect deal for her family. But when that clause kicked in, let's just say her son's cheap purchase turned into something that cost 100 times more than he ever imagined. And the best part was all by the book. Karen had always been the kind of neighbor who treated the HOA rules like they were her personal commandments. She knew every clause, every outdated regulation, and she used them like weapons. I'd heard stories from other homeowners, a man fined for having the wrong shade of curtains, a family ordered to repaint their mailbox twice in 1 year. But I never thought I'd be her main target. My rental house wasn't fancy, but it was clean, well-kept, and had good tenants who paid on time. Still, Karen found problems that no one else seemed to care about. She claimed the fence height violated standards, even though it was the same as the neighbors. She said the front door color was too bold for the community, even though I'd painted it years before without complaint. Every letter she sent came with a fine, and each fine was bigger than the last. When I asked other HOA board members about it, they shrugged and told me Karen knew the rules better than anyone. It was clear she had influence, and people either didn't want to get involved or were afraid of crossing her. The more I resisted, the more aggressive she became. That's when she brought up her son. She spoke like she was doing me a favor, saying, "If you sell to him, we can forget about all these violations." The price she offered was insulting, barely enough to cover my mortgage, but the pressure she was putting on me was relentless. Late-night calls from tenants about surprise inspections, notices on my door when I visited, even petty things like complaining about where my trash bins were placed. I realized this wasn't just about money. Karen wanted control, and if she got my house into her son's hands, she'd have exactly that. What she didn't realize was that I'd already started digging. The HOA rules were long and boring, but hidden deep inside them were provisions that most people ignored. I knew if I played this carefully, I could turn her own obsession with the rules against her. By the time we sat down to sign the sale papers, I was ready, and that tiny, overlooked clause, it was waiting like a trap she'd never see coming. Karen's son, Mark, showed up for the final walkthrough like he already owned the place. He had that same smug smile his mother wore, the kind that made you feel like the punchline to a joke you didn't hear. He barely glanced at the house, making little comments about all the upgrades he'd do once he moved in. I kept my face neutral, nodding politely, but inside, I was already counting down to the moment he'd realize what I'd done. The clause I had slipped into the contract wasn't flashy. It didn't scream trap. In fact, it looked like standard HOA compliance language, something every homeowner in the community had to agree to. The difference was that I had linked it to an obscure maintenance provision buried in the HOA bylaws. One that triggered automatic fees if certain community services were voluntarily enhanced by the property owner. And those fees weren't small. The funny thing was, Karen herself had pushed for that provision years ago to target a different neighbor. She never thought it would come back around. I had just connected the dots. Meanwhile, I kept getting updates from my old tenants. They told me Karen was already making plans for beautifying the property the moment the ink was dry. Landscaping, a custom fence, even a small decorative fountain in the front yard. All things that sounded nice on paper but would activate the exact fees outlined in that clause. Behind the scenes, I also learned more about Mark. He wasn't just looking for a home. He was planning to turn the place into a short-term rental for extra income. That meant constant changes, new amenities, and plenty of HOA approvals, each one a chance for the clause to kick in. Karen thought she'd beaten me at my own game. But every improvement she encouraged her son to make was actually setting him up for a financial nightmare. I could almost see the moment coming, the day they'd get their first bill, and realize it wasn't a typo dot until then. I kept my mouth shut, letting them dig themselves deeper with every upgrade they bragged about. The trap was set. Now it was only a matter of time. It didn't take long for the changes to start. Within a week of Mark taking ownership, contractors were swarming the place. Trucks lined the street, workers unloaded pallets of stone, and the noise of saws and drills filled the air from sunrise to sunset. Karen walked around with a clipboard like she was directing a movie, pointing out where the new fence should go, what kind of lighting they needed, and exactly how the landscaping had to match the HOA's highest standards. From my own porch down the block, I watched it all unfold. Every hammer strike, every freshly planted shrub, every fountain pipe going into the ground was another step closer to triggering the clause. And the best part? They were proud of it. Karen bragged to anyone who would listen about how her son was restoring the value of the property and showing the neighborhood how it's done. The tension was building like a storm cloud. I'd run the numbers over and over in my head. I knew exactly what kind of bill they were walking into. And I also knew they had no idea it was coming. The HOA compliance office was just waiting for the final inspection to process the fees. The moment that paperwork was signed off, the cost would hit them all at once. In the meantime, small signs of strain started to show. Mark complained about unexpected expenses, a plumbing issue here, an electrical upgrade there. I overheard him mutter to Karen about bleeding money before the house was even ready for guests. She brushed it off, saying it was all part of investing in the future. But I could see it in his face. The optimism was fading. And once the fountain was installed, the last piece of their grand plan, the trigger would be pulled. The clause wasn't just going to nibble at their finances. It was going to take a massive bite all at once. I stayed quiet, watching the final days of their project like a chess player seeing the checkmate line. The contractors were packing up. The fountain gurgled to life. The inspection was scheduled. And all I had to do was wait for the bill to land like a thunderclap. The inspection day came. But instead of the quiet satisfaction I'd expected, something strange happened. The HOA inspector showed up, clipboard in hand, and barely stepped inside before Karen appeared at his side. She wasn't just there to oversee. She was whispering to him, flipping through papers, and pointing out things I couldn't hear. By the time he left, she had that same smug smile as the day she first came to my porch. Later that evening, heard through one of my old tenants that Karen had been bragging again. This time about getting ahead of any surprise fees. My stomach tightened. It was possible she'd somehow caught wind of the clause. I had been so careful, so subtle, but Karen wasn't dumb when it came to HOA rules. If she'd dug deep enough, she might have found it. The problem was, the clause wasn't something you could just erase once the contract was signed. But if she had realized what it did, she might be scheming to avoid triggering it, which would ruin everything I'd set up. That's when the second twist hit. 2 days later, I got an email from the HOA office, not addressed to me directly, but accidentally forwarded with a subject line that made my pulse jump. Urgent. Board vote, special improvement project. Attached was a proposal to fund a neighborhood-wide beautification initiative, starting with, of all things, Mark's new property as the model home. If it passed, the HOA itself would pay for more enhancements, bigger landscaping, new lighting, even structural changes, all things that would absolutely, without question, set off the clause. Only this time on a much larger scale. The fees wouldn't just be big, they'd be massive. I realized Karen might have thought she was shielding her son from a financial hit, but in trying to